Welcome to this edition of Inside the Academy Studio.
Today's conversation will be about Morton Tilden's Imitation Game. Imitation Game was adapted to screen by Grant Moore from the biography by Andrew Hodges. It takes an expansive look into the life and career of famed mathematician Alan Turing, played by Benedict Cumberbatch. From the childhood relationships that defined him, to the code-breaking innovation that helped Britain turn the tide in World War II, and the post-World War II persecution that followed and ended his life. Imitation Game is directed by relatively new for American audiences, a Norwegian director, Morten Tilden. And he has the responsibility right away to weave together three framing periods. You have the period of the 20s, when Turing was in school. You have the wartime, when they're trying to break Enigma, the German coding system where they send messages. And then the early 50s, post-war life. It's an interesting way to tell the complete story of one person. You kind of get bits and pieces from every stage. Do you feel using these three framing devices adds anything to a most likely what Imitation Game is, a traditional biopic?
I think that's the intent, but there's certain points where I don't think it was as successful as other biopics in like redefining the structure, because at the end of the day, it's just the movie does play out in sequential order, but it's just certain flashbacks happen at different times. That's really it. So it is essentially a traditional biopic at its core, and really there's nothing wrong with that if it's done well.
Yeah, I think it's ambitious. It wants to kind of twist the narrative, but it's really sequential. Like you say, we find out, sure, he names Christopher, but then we find out a bit later why he's named the machine Christopher. It's his childhood friend that he had a great deal of affection for who died very young. So it does try to play around with narrative, but it's quite traditional in it. In any biopic, obviously the person who portrays the main character, Alan Turing, famed mathematician, innovative, influential in modern computing, played by Benedict Cumberbatch. Fans obviously know him from the Sherlock series, multiple films in the last couple of years. I think, he makes a decision in this film to portray Turing in a way that, I don't know if you can define it, maybe leaning towards somebody on the Asperger's syndrome line. And, it's a common way to portray a sort of genius, somebody who's so talented they're not necessarily gregarious, they're not outgoing. Talk about Cumberbatch. How does he embody the Turing performance, and what does he add, or what are elements that you like of his performance of Turing? Well,
I think the biggest thing I do like is he does keep it focused on what Turing is doing. So it doesn't seem like he's an aloof genius who just has to stumble in and work on something and just like walk away. Like, he shows he does put in multiple hours, and it is the ultimate goal of his, and it's the ultimate goal of mine is to break Enigma, and he does that by, of course, making his Christopher machine.
No, exactly. It's very plot-driven. He's doing an objective. It's not kind of resting on the place where it's simmering that it's like, okay, he can't have a relationship with people. It's kind of, he's doing work, and he's kind of using that to his advantage. The letter he sends to Churchill to kind of get the funding. It's all mechanics to kind of achieving the end goal. I think one of the great relationships in this film, or interplays, I think, that helps both actors kind of humanize these roles is Keira Knightley's Joan Clark, a colleague, a woman at this time, obviously not a field that women were prominent in, mathematics, science. So that alone is barrier breaking, but I feel like the moments that the two have together Otherwise we see Turing with the other crypto analysts, and there's obviously they're butting heads. But it seems when Knightley and Cumberbatch are on the screen together, you kind of see the full scope of what Turing wanted to do and what ultimately they both achieved together.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely Keira Knightley's character, or Joan Clark, is definitely kind of the way that they show how Turing was able to get his ultimate goals done because of how he was able to relate to at least some characters in his real life, and maybe he didn't get along with other characters. So it showed how he was able to walk that line, and he wasn't quite as obviously he didn't get along with everyone, but he was able to get along with enough people to get the job done at the end of the day.
And I think Knightley does a good enough job of, both providing that integrity that Joan Clark deserves. She was an important cog, important piece of this team and what the venture they ultimately achieved, but also kind of, showing the sensibilities of a young woman at this time, and, first the huge departure it is to move away from your parents and do this item, but then also to fall in love with a person, who ultimately you're okay with being a friend and not anything more. And that kind of respect and relationship they create, I think, is the heart of the film. Both Cumberbatch and Knightley are recognized by the Academy this year. Cumberbatch in Best Actor in a Leading Role, and Knightley in Best Actress in a Supporting Role. Let's talk about a little bit more fun thing here. This is before modern computing, but we get to see the rise of CIA warfare, if you want to say it. So warfare that's not done on the field, but it's done hidden away, secretly. You're strategizing based on successful strikes. I guess predicated before drone warfare. Taking your chances when you need to. Let's talk about it. Is there any modern parallels to what we have in drone warfare, modern warfare, and also really putting into perspective how important these crypto analysts were in kind of ending World War II or helping to end World War II?
Yeah, this film definitely puts a big focus on what they did, because intercepting messages at a time when telecommunications was at a very nascent stage was how you would gain such a big advantage so quickly, because in World War II there was a huge technological advance from even World War I 30 years ago, or 20 years ago, my mistake. Yeah, so, and I think really trying to keep on top of all the technology and being able to synthesize information and make sure you're not only protecting soldiers on the field, but also protecting civilians, because as being a world war, there were numerous attacks on liners across the Atlantic Ocean, and that's definitely plays into a big plot point, and that once they finally do crack the Enigma machine.
Yeah, and a lot of the post-campaign about Imitation Game has been said about how important Turing and his team, Hugh Alexander, Joan Clark, were in both establishing what modern computing is, but also the benefits it has for modern warfare. The Secretary of Defense wrote a piece about his appreciation. I wanted to touch upon the production design, which is being honored by the Academy. Specifically this year, Maria Yurkovich and Tatiana MacDonald being recognized. I think in any period piece, people think it's an easy job to kind of set the tone, but I think they do a great job in creating Bletchley Park. This confined community, obviously doing secretive work, but I think it really is vibrant. It seems self-contained, but it seems still full of energy and joy, and a lot of people coming in and out. So I think they do a great job of setting the scene of Bletchley Park, which is so pivotal to the film.
Yeah, it definitely felt like, also that really capturing that time period at Bletchley Park, but also accurately depicting his childhood in the 20s, and then really showing that turn in the 50s, where you see the different type of clothing and the different cars you see in the 50s. So it really was able to span a few decades and really make it feel seamless.
Yeah, definitely subtle changes, but good settings altogether. We're almost ending this episode of Inside the Academy Studio, and like always, we like to end with certain questions. So I'm going to ask, what was your favorite moment of the Imitation Game?
I think my favorite moment was kind of how when Turing was being interrogated and he explained what the war was to him. It was, and how atypical it was to be a soldier not in the field, but to be working 12, 16 hours a day, and something even 18 or something, to try to work and crack these codes and building this machine, and how even though they weren't putting their lives on the line per se, how much they were doing to contribute to save lives at the end of the day. So it was a different perspective than we see from other World War II films.
Yeah, and for me, I know a lot of the work was done in that 18-hour time frame where the Enigma code would come in, where it would be reset. But I really, like I mentioned before, I liked when Alan and Joan kind of did their work off-site initially. When he would bring the codes to her, and it felt like that's where the progress was happening, and it wasn't happening with everyone else in the studio. So that's my kind of favorite moment of the film. What about your least favorite moment of Imitation Game?
I think my least favorite moment of the Imitation Game is actually when they do crack Enigma, and they immediately go to the scene where they realize, okay, we can't use can't use the fact that we broke the code right now, and we can't intercept the Germans' message, because I feel like working on Enigma for that long and trying to break the codes, you would come to that realization sooner. And I think the real life historians did state, yeah, that's what they did know that was going to happen. And I feel creating that scene in between where I believe one of the characters' brothers is on the ship that's about to be bombed, I feel like it created too much of a false pretense to get an emotional response to that situation. I thought it could have been handled in a way that would have been genuine to history, but still could have elicited that same emotional response.
No, I agree. You have the eureka moment, but then you have the axe fall down on somebody's head. That seems arbitrary to me, right? You do so much work, and then, okay, oh my god, we just thought of this, and it can't go forward. I agree. It was sort of clunky. My least favorite moment, and I think we didn't touch upon it in the podcast yet, but a lot of the film is supposed to be about appreciating Turing and the complete Turing, someone who was a homosexual man in the 1940s and 1950s, and how that wasn't obviously respected or accepted, and how the radical drug regime possibly led to his premature death. I think how we kind of were at that engagement party, and he kind of just blurts it out to the other guy, the other agent, and then the agent says, "Hey, I've been a Russian spy, and now I have this over you." What should have been an emotional and important moment was just used as a story piece, like it just, okay, now I have that over you kind of thing, where you would think, hey, he just told it to his colleague, and it should mean something more. So to me, that was not one of the strongest points. Okay, word association. When you think of the Imitation Game, what word do you think of?
Enigma.
And I think of Bletchley Park. So when we think of the Imitation Game, we think of Enigma and the Bletchley Park. Thank you for listening to this edition of Inside the Academy Studio.
Thank you.